But back to the budget. Yes, indeed. We're 6 days out from the Abbott government's first budget. And today, the Finance Minister, Matthias Cormann, he's asking you to please trust him to do what's good for you.
Coalition members and senators don't like higher taxes. I don't like higher taxes. We want taxes to be lower. What we would ask people across Australia to do is to trust us. We have reviewed all of the information on coming into government. We've worked very carefully through all that was in front of us. And we have made the judgments that we think are necessary in order to strengthen the country, in order to build a stronger, more prosperous economy.
And to help convince you of the need for tough budget measures, today Senator Cormann released a booklet outlining what he's described as the budget mess left behind by Labor. It was a booklet prepared by Liberal backbencher Kelly O'Dwyer, and she joins us now. Kelly, good evening.
Good evening, Jonathan.
There's going to be a debt tax, isn't there?
Well, look, we don't know yet, Jonathan, what's in the budget because neither you nor I, unless there's something I don't know, we're not psychics. And until the 13th of May, the budget's not going to be delivered. But one of the important things I think it's worth establishing right here, right now is, you know, exactly the position we find ourselves in. And that's why I set about putting together the facts for the Australian people to assess, because the Australian people are very bright. They know that our budget is broken. They know that the Labor Party broke our budget. They know that they're not prepared to get involved in fixing the mess, and they know that there is a structural spending problem as well.
But they're also bright enough to know that they voted the Labor Party out and that your party is now in government and needs to take responsibility for the economy.
And that is exactly what we will do. But what we first need to do is, before you can fix the problem, you need to understand it. You're doomed to repeat the mistakes of the past unless you learn the lessons of history. And we have put together a booklet here that talks about the fact that Labor got us into a huge spending problem and a huge debt problem. When you consider the deficits that they delivered year after year, it was $191 billion at a time when we had some of our highest terms of trade. We were going through the second mining boom at that time, not a recession as we did before we came into government in 1996 when Peter Costello had to repay back Labor's $96 billion of debt. But they actually went through a period of time of great prosperity and yet continued to deliver deficits, which racked up a huge amount of debt. Looking forward over the next 10 years, we're going to see debt up to $667 billion if we do nothing today.
Now, this book that was put out today that outlines that picture you're just describing, how was that arranged? Liberal Party funds used in this, or were there taxpayer-funded resources put into it as well?
Well, the Liberal Party funded the publication of this, and I thought it was important to gather the information together on the public record to arm the Australian people with the facts, because we don't just ask the Australian people to trust us to fix this problem. We believe that they need to understand the mess that we find ourselves in, and it's not something that we ourselves are asserting. The International Monetary Fund have done a recent assessment of the 17 advanced economies in the world, and they found that Australia had the fastest and greatest spending growth. Now, that's ahead of the USA, that's ahead of Canada, Korea, Japan, France and Germany.
That's all true, but those IMF spending projections, they go out to 2018. They're based in part on MyEFO figures that include spending from the Abbott government. How can you blame that trend on Labor?
Well, Labor had projections that had heroic assumptions in them. They promised, let's not forget, to deliver a surplus each and every year that they were in government. In fact, they promised it over 500 times, and every year they delivered a deficit and increased debt.
But that doesn't go to this spending trend out to 2018.
Well, what we did is, coming into government and looking at the MyEFO figures, we made sure that the assumptions within those figures were, in fact, prudent and sensible. And we have been straight up with the Australian people about the problem that we face. Not only that, we commissioned the Commission of Audit to actually have a look at the spending projections going forward, and it is a very frightening thing. I mean, Labor said that they would keep to a real growth spending cap of around about 2%. They didn't do that. It was actually on average 3.5%, and in the year beyond the forward estimates, so the year that we're going to now be considering in this upcoming budget, it was going to triple to 6%. And an increase going forward. Now, that's simply not sustainable, and we have a responsibility to future generations to make sure that we put the budget on a sustainable footing so that we can invest, not just in having a good economy for the sake of having a good economy, but because we need to invest in the future productive infrastructure that we need, in the services that we're going to require, such as the National Disability Insurance Scheme, and in making sure that we have money available if there are problems in our future. Set aside for a rainy day.
While your booklet today, it outlines and it gives that IMF chart and those IMF numbers around spending growth towards 2018. The IMF document that was taken from also shows a graph with Australia having almost the lowest debt on the graph by 2018. You don't include that one. Are you being rather selective with the numbers from the IMF that you quote?
Well, not at all. In fact, I include a graph there from the IMF that also talks about our net debt growth, because we have to look at where we started from. The Labor Party never wants to talk about that. We had no net debt, and yet of the 17 advanced economies that they looked at, we had projected net debt growth amongst the third highest of those 17 advanced economies. Now, this is a trajectory that we simply cannot afford, and I think most Australians understand that. They know that, we can kick the can down the road, but the people who will be paying the price for that are future generations, and already they're going to have to be working harder and longer when you consider the fact that, we have an ageing population and there are going to be less people of working age for every person aged 65 and older. But to add to them this debt legacy as well is, I think, simply unfair, and it's a question of intergenerational equity. We need to do something about it, and we need to do it today. One
last graph question, Kelly O'Dwyer. I mean, there are, as I say, a lot of IMF graphs in the book. The one that you don't give also is one that shows taxation receipts as a percentage of GDP, with Australia well below the 30-year average. That's part of this equation, isn't it? We're not getting the money in the door that we used to.
Well, no, that's simply not the case. I mean,
that's the case according to the IMF.
Well, no. But during Labor's time in government, Australia's terms of trade were on average 55% higher than under the coalition. They received more revenue than the previous coalition government. The problem was that over their period of time in government, they doubled spending. So that is the issue. The issue is around structural spending and making structural reform. They can't complain that revenue didn't increase, because it did increase. It was higher than we received during the last year of the coalition government.
Well, it's been in very solid decline according to the IMF, but let's leave that, although it does raise this issue of the potential goodness of a debt levy. Why wouldn't that be a good idea?
Well, look, as I said before, we don't yet know what's going to be in the budget because it hasn't yet been delivered, Jonathan. But if you're asking me, are there arguments to get the debt down as quickly as possible? There certainly are arguments to get the debt down.
Would a tax be a good way to do that?
And some of those arguments to get the debt down as quickly as possible are to do with intergenerational fairness. I mean, why should we be asking our children and their children to pay for our spending today?
OECD out there today saying that the government shouldn't cut spending too hard or raise taxes too fast. Is that a risk?
Well, there is a lot of structural reform we need to put in place, and structural reform, as you know, will take place over a period of time. And I think, when we see the budget on the 13th of May, it will answer a number of those questions about the structural reforms that we need to put in place.
Now, debt tax wouldn't be a structural reform, would it?
Well, I'll give credit to the Labor Party on this particular point, and that is, they recognised, and we supported them in that recognition, that there needs to be an increase in the age before which people actually can get the pension. In 2023, they put it up from 65 to 67. Now, we recognise that was a structural change that needed to be made. We supported them in that change. There are going to need to be further structural changes, and the big question is going to be, are the Labor Party going to play their part in helping fix the problem that they created?
Will the country be smiling come a couple of hours on next Tuesday?
Well, look, I don't think anybody enjoys pain. Just as nobody voluntarily wants to undergo open heart surgery, Jonathan. You do it because you have to do it, and it's responsible to do it. And I think the worst thing we can possibly do is not take the advice that we've been given and to kick the can down the road. Future generations certainly won't thank us for that.
Sounds like open heart surgery. Sounds like a difficult evening, Kelly O'Dwyer.
Well, in life things can be difficult, and
life wasn't meant to be easy, as somebody once famously observed.
We have been tasked, Jonathan, to make those difficult decisions, and we are up to that challenge.
Kelly O'Dwyer, thanks for your time.
Great to be with you, Jonathan.
Kelly O'Dwyer, government backbencher, and the woman behind a booklet launched by the Finance Minister Matthias Cormann today that details Labor's mess ahead of, next week, next Tuesday, Joe Hockey's first budget